Amen.
Who is the Reverend Dr. Eva C. Foster? Well, I'm glad you asked. She is a graduate of the Drew Theological School, and she holds a Master of Divinity and a Master's in Sacred Theology. She earned a doctorate in ministry in Metro Union Ministries from the New Brunswick Theological Seminary and has pursued coursework for certification in grief counseling. She is also an adjunct professor in biblical studies at Pillar College in Newark, New Jersey, and is employed by the Mental Health Association of Essex and Mars. Ladies and gentlemen, just hold on to your seat because I know she has a word, she has a word, she has a word. So without further ado, I'm going to get through my little public service announcements, and the next person you hear will be that of the Reverend Dr. Eva C. Foster. The Pews Program. Pews Program was developed to educate clergy, lay leaders, and faith communities so that they may more effectively support congregants who have or may be at risk of having a mental illness. With that being said, pastors and leaders will then be better equipped to refer congregants to appropriate services, and ultimately linkage to mental health services will increase. And so as you can see, the slide tells you every Tuesday at 2 o'clock, we will be here unless there's some type of a holiday, and even then we may still be here. So please check your schedules.
How's everybody doing? I want to first wish you all a happy new year. 19 days in and we're still here. So that's the good news. I want to share a little bit with you from a gospel text. Looking at the gospel according to Mark, the 4th chapter, and I want to pull out 2 verses, Mark 4:35, and then skipping over to verse 40. So Mark 4:35 says, "That day when evening came, he said to his disciples, 'Let's go over to the other side.'" And then verse 40 says, "He said to his disciples, 'Why are you so afraid? Do you still have no faith?'" I think we can all agree that life is a journey. On this journey, there are new joys to experience, new blessings to enjoy, new opportunities to embark upon. Even in the midst of tests and trials, life is still a wonderful journey. And with a little bit of faith, we can continue on this journey to make it to the other side. The 4th chapter of the Gospel of Mark gives us a picture of the journey that I'm talking about. I've read just a small portion of that chapter, but let me give you a little background as to what is going on in this 4th chapter of Mark's Gospel. It all begins with Jesus surrounded by the crowd and surrounded by his disciples. They were all hungry for more and desired greatly to hear what Jesus had to say. Jesus covered a lot of ground in the time that he spent teaching on that day. The crowds were eager for more spiritual food. The crowds continued to grow as Jesus walked among them. The crowds pressed in upon him so much so that Jesus decided to get in a boat and cast off, floating out into the water so that everyone could hear his voice. You see, the water in the background would serve as a natural amplifier so that everyone could hear what Jesus had to say. Jesus began to speak to the crowds in parables, using illustrated stories to get his point across. Many of the people that Jesus met were not spiritually minded enough to understand what he wanted them to know, so he said it in a way that they could comprehend. On this particular day, Jesus taught them from several different parables. He told them about the parable of the sower. Perhaps you know the story. It was designed to teach the crowd that all of them were represented in that ground where the seed had been sown. Then he taught the crowd about hiding their light under a bushel. He moved on to talk about in between the text of the lamp and the growing seed, he gave them the third parable concerning how they would only get out of serving him what they put into serving him. The fourth parable that Jesus gave to them referred back to a seed again. And finally, the fifth parable was about having faith the size of a grain of a mustard seed. In all that day, Jesus taught 5 parables. The crowd was overwhelming, and at the end of that day, Jesus and the disciples were exhausted. This is where the next part of Mark's chapter comes into play. The verses that we read just a few minutes ago, that 35th verse, and on the same day when the evening was come, he said to them, let's go over to the other side. The day was nearly done, and it was time to go on with their normal life. The disciples didn't know it, but Jesus was getting ready for the greatest lesson of the day. Although they sat under the teaching of 5 parables, a greater lesson was about to come. And it would come in a way that the disciples would never forget as long as they lived. They didn't understand it yet, but there was soon to be a debriefing session, sort of a meeting after the meeting. You church folks know about the parking lot meeting. So this was going to be a meeting after the meeting where only those who knew Jesus in the most intimate way would learn from his great love and his power. After a full day of teaching and hearing all these different parables, these different lessons, Jesus tells his disciples, it's time to go over to the other side. Lessons were taught in a way that they could understand, but now it was time to go over to the other side. We are just a little over 2 weeks into a new year. 2020 is gone, thank you, Jesus, and we have embarked on a new year. We have crossed over. And at the end of each year, many of us commit to not carry anything from the previous year into a new year. This year, that commitment rings so much truer than ever before. 2020 was the year that almost wasn't. We can say it was probably the only year that lasted less than 3 months. Everything after March 16th or 17th is a complete blur. Our lives changed. On the list of things to remember when leaving home, it now includes a mask. It used to be your keys, your wallet, and your cell phone. Now we've added masks and gloves to that list. Physical contact is forbidden. Social distancing is the order of the day. 2020 was marked with a pandemic that spread throughout the world. In less than a year, there have been 95.2 million cases and 2.03 million deaths worldwide, all due to COVID-19. In the midst of the pandemic, the Black Lives Matter movement returned in full swing after the senseless police-involved killings of George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, and Breonna Taylor. These incidents sparked a wave of peaceful and sometimes violent demonstrations and riots across the world to demand an end to police brutality and racial injustice. The deaths of celebrities and public figures like Kobe Bryant, Alex Trebek, Chadwick Boseman, Congressman and civil rights leader John Lewis, Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg all came as shocks to us, but need not be minimized by the innumerable deaths caused by COVID-19. We come to the end of 2020 with a newfound hope, a hope that 2021 had to be a better year. We have crossed over to the other side. But here's what I have to say about that. Crossing over to the other side means nothing if we have not learned from the experience of the past year. Just like in this morning's text, after the crowd, after the disciples sat under Jesus's teaching, after they had spent some time learning these 5 parables, the question is not what did you learn from the parables that were taught? The question really becomes, how do you apply what you have learned to what you are about to face? When the disciples got in their boats, they had no idea they were about to face a storm. They had no idea that the storm they were going to face would be so ferocious that they would fear for their very lives. The one thing they were certain of was that Jesus was present with them. We have been through a year like no other. Can we say that Jesus was with us? Of course we can. Jesus is true to his promise that he will never leave us, nor will he ever forsake us. It is not a matter of Jesus being present. It is not a matter of God's omnipresence. The matter at hand lies within ourselves. When we get to the other side, will we have the faith to make it through? Will we have the faith to put into action all that we have learned? Or are those lessons merely knowing what has been taught to us and never taking advantage of the opportunity to put our learning into action? Jesus said to the disciples, let's go over to the other side. They had no idea what they would find on the other side, but in obedience, they went. If they stayed with the crowd, they would have had the knowledge of his word. They might even be able to get close to him and hear him speak to them. But if they want to really know him in the power of his might, in the fellowship of his sufferings, and in the glory of his majesty, they had to go over to the other side. The other side of what, you might ask? You have to get to the other side of the storms, the other side of doubts, the other side of fears. You've got to get out of your comfort zone. You have got to launch out into the deep, step out into the water and get out there where the waves and the winds can knock you around and test your faith to the max. 2020 took us there. We faced a storm like none other, and the winds and the waves of 2020 were beyond brutal. But despite what 2020 hurled at us, we have got to lean on the faith of what we have learned in his word. It's only in circumstances like we faced in the past that you can really know the love and the power of God in its fullest measure. It's easy to love God when everything's fine. It's easy to love God when things are going well, but when things start to get rocky, when the boat starts to hit rough water, that's when our faith is tested. The text this morning reminds us of the storm. This familiar story to us, the disciples were in their ships and Jesus was in the back of the ship. Not only was he in the back of the ship, but Jesus had the nerve to be sleeping in the back of the ship in the midst of a storm. A great storm arose and the waves began to beat on the boat. The boat became filled with water and the disciples became fearful. They knew that Jesus was their only hope, but when they called out to him, they found him to be asleep in the back of the boat. Didn't he care whether his disciples died in that storm? Carest thou not that we perish? You know the story. Jesus stood up in the boat and he spoke to the storm. He got up, he rebuked the wind, and he said to the sea, "Peace, be still." And immediately the wind stopped and there was a great calm. But that wasn't all. Jesus spoke to the wind, then he spoke to the disciples, and he said to them, "Why are you afraid? How is it that you have no faith?" The disciples found themselves in a storm that Jesus was able to calm because he is the master of the seas. But his question to them about their faith should not be overlooked. Perhaps they thought that the storm was the greatest turmoil they would have to face, but they had not yet made it over to the other side. The disciples were probably glad and rejoiced that Jesus calmed the sea and made the storm stop, but they had not yet made it over to the other side. You see, on the other side of the sea, on the other side of the storm that they had just experienced, was the land of the Gadarenes, where Jesus and his disciples would come face to face with a legion of demons. Jesus knew what was coming, but his disciples did not. Jesus knew that they had heard some great teaching, but they still did not understand his power and his identity as the very Son of God. They needed to know him more. Getting over to the other side requires some real testing. Jesus will send us through some storms in life, and he will let our spiritual ships get battered and nearly swamped with the cares of life and the oppressions of the world. Sometimes it seems that we are full of troubles and we just can't take it anymore without going under for the last time. But that is all part of the journey, and it doesn't bother Jesus at all because he's already said that we are going to the other side, and he has no intention of allowing our ship to sink. We have made it into 2021. We have made it to the other side. And we pray that what we experience on this side will be so much better than what we experienced last year. But in reality, we don't know what 2021 has in store. Or we have made it to what we think is the other side of COVID-19, the other side of the racial oppression that we've experienced last year, the other side of political unrest, the other side of a governmental administration that had us pulling our hair out. Yes, we've made it to the other side of 2020. And as we enter into 2021, do we find ourselves in the land of the Gadarenes? Are we in Gadara, coming face to face with a man stepping out of the tombs filled with a demon, not filled with demons, so many demons that he tells Jesus his name is Legion. Legion, because we are many. Oh, somebody here knows what I'm talking about. And if you don't, let me refresh your memory. You see, just 6 days into this new year, there was an attack against the United States Capitol building, a riotous and violent attack carried out by a mob of angry Trump supporters in an attempt to overturn his defeat in the 2020 presidential election. Oh, somebody here knows what I'm talking about, but if you don't, let me refresh your memory. Tomorrow, we will celebrate the inauguration of a new president with National Guard presence, not only in the U.S. Capitol, but in state capitals across our country. We have indeed crossed over to the other side. And although we have made it out of 2020 and into 2021, we have no idea what lies in store for us. We faced storms in 2020. Our boats were ravaged by the winds and the waves, but now we embark and have entered into a new year. And all we can do is pray that this year will be better than last year. I have no clue what to expect in 2021. I have no idea how this year will unfold, but here's what I do know. When Jesus said, let's go over to the other side, he wants us to finish the journey and reach the other side of the shore safely. When Jesus said, let's go over to the other side, he plans to go with us. Jesus didn't say to the disciple, go to the other side. He said, come, let us go to the other side. And here's what else I want you to know. I plan to go to the other side. I don't know what's in store for me. I don't know what I will find on the other side. But this one thing I am sure of. If it had not been for the Lord on my side, I have no idea where I would be. I am so glad that I serve a God who promised to never leave me or forsake me. I am so glad I serve a God who promised to be with me through the good times and through the bad times. I am so glad that I've made it into 2021, that I've crossed over to this side of what 2020 dumped on me. But even more than all of that, I am so glad that I have the Lord on my side. I'm not sure of what your religious conviction might be. I'm not sure what your source of faith is. I'm not sure what you hold on to for calm in the midst of your storms. I know that I will look to the hills from whence cometh my help, because my help comes from the Lord who made heaven and earth. I encourage you today, no matter what your faith system might be, I encourage you today, no matter where you may place your trust, I encourage you today to find an anchor in your life. I encourage you today to find something to hold on to in the storms that you will inevitably and undoubtedly face. For me, it's my religious conviction. For you, it may be something else. I'm not judging. I'm just saying there will be storms. We will face Gadara with the demons too numerous to count. Find something. Find a source of faith. Find a source of hope. Find a source of peace in your life. For surely we are embarking on turbulent times. May God bless you. Amen.